Hello, crafty friends! It's Alicia here with a project for Tailored Expressions. In today's video, I'm going to be making a pair of cards using the brand new Pieced Patterns card making kit. In the kit, you get the 4-square 6x6 background stamp with 4 different designs, the new TE Maps Pieced Patterns sheets, and 2 dies, squares and triangles, to help you cut out those pieces perfectly. To help with sentiments, you get the Insider's Everyday Occasion set, and to help keep your pieces in place on your cards, you get a package of sticky sheets. Available outside of the kit is the pierced grid cutting plate, which will help you make your own patterns out of your squares and triangles, and the Pieced Patterns envelope seals, which not only will these add some fun to the outside of envelopes, but they would make cute focal points as well on cards. For my cards today, I decided to go with kind of a rustic feel, so I chose toffee, sour gummy, and mulled wine. For die cutting, I'll be using additional A2 layer stacklets, the Frame and Frame 3 cutting plate, and hexagon stacklets. For one of my cards, I'll be adding a sentiment with the On Occasion stamp and die set, and embellishing both with the gold matte enamel dots. To help with stamping, I got out the exclusive TE Teal Misty and the Just Press tool. And finally, here is a look at everything I'll use to hold my cards together. Let's get crafty! To get started, I cut down some scraps of cardstock to 2.5-inch squares. Because I'm using a red rubber background stamp, I can take the foam mat out of my Misty. To go with the rustic color palette and feel of my cards, I will be using the wood grain section of the background stamp, and I placed it so that portion was toward the lower right-hand corner of the Misty. Once that was secure on the door, I added a little adhesive to the back of one of the squares, and then I placed that face down so the sticky side was up in the area where the wood grain stamp part was. Then I'm going to flip up the opposite side of the Misty to make that stick. And now, so later I'll know better where to place my next square, I did move this first one just a little bit so it lined up in the corners. Then, using toffee ink for a tone-on-tone look, I inked up pretty much just that little portion that I needed and got that stamped onto the toffee. And you'll see here just a slight difference it makes, but it adds some interest to the piece. I continued adding this texture to each of my cardstock squares, and between the colors I did make sure to clean off the ink from the rubber stamp and any that had gotten on the back of the Misty. I did show quickly that when I was cutting my scraps, I cut 4 toffee squares and 2 each of the sour gummy and mulled wine. But just a heads up that if you do want to follow today's tutorial, go ahead and cut 4 of each color. For this first card, I decided on the chevron pattern from the TE Maps package, and because of this, I only need the triangle die. So for now, I'm going to set the square one to the side. I took each of my squares off camera to do the die cutting, and I have to say that this made quick work of all these little pieces. Now it's time to start building the pattern, and for this I will be using those sticky sheets that came in the kit. These are cut perfectly to the size of each of the maps. When I place sticky sheets onto a TE map, I like to start by carefully aligning one corner, getting the corner and those 2 sides started well. Then I flip it over and I slowly peel back that release paper and press down the map as I go. Next, instead of pulling back the entire other side of the release paper, I am just going to pull back a small section at the bottom so I can get started on the pattern, which for me, I'm going to use the toffee colored pieces on the white area of my map. When you start to build your pattern, you'll want to try to get those first pieces as close as possible to the printed lines. And then from then on, you're going to use the edges of the pieces that you've already placed. Try to line up those corners and edges as close as possible. I continued filling up my sheet with the little triangles. For the medium gray, I used mulled wine, and for the dark gray, I used the sour gummy. One thing you'll notice is that I rotate my piece around a lot, and this is where it was good to only pull back a portion of that release paper. This is going to give my fingers and my sleeves less of a chance to get caught up in the adhesive. I love the detail that being able to stamp that texture onto the squares gives this finished piece. It reminds me of an old parquet floor. Once you have your pattern finished, you could cut off the excess from around the map, but I'll be die cutting this later so I can skip that step. For my second card, I'm using the pierced grid cutting plate, and I cut a piece of toffee that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to take this off screen to add the grid, and I also stamped and die cut a couple more of the mulled wine and sour gummy triangle pieces. For the second card, I'm going to use the toffee background in place of the toffee triangles, so I set those extras to the side. And because I'm not covering the complete panel, I do need to use some liquid glue in place of the sticky sheets. I decided for this card I would go with the same chevron pattern, so I tried to find a point on the one I had already made that would correspond to my pierced grids. Once I found that, I'm going to place my first piece. Liquid glue is a great idea for this since you have a little wiggle time before it dries. Then, just like with the first card, I'm going to try to get that first piece placed as perfectly as is possible. Then I'm just going to keep building that pattern by using the other pieces and always trying to have a full side to line up against another piece. The great thing about having the pierced grid option is that you can come up with your own patterns, or you can do like I did here and mimic one of the maps, maybe while you're waiting for your next shipment. The grid lines help you keep everything as nice and straight as possible. I continued adding the patterns until it was done, and here's a look at the finished second card front. To cut both of these down, I'm using the second from the largest die from the additional A2 layer stacklet set. For the first card, the one that is completely covered with triangles, I'm going to turn that to make it horizontal. And to add a little extra color, I brought in the frame and frame 3 cutting plate, and using the second from the largest, I'm going to cut one of those from the mulled wine. For my second card, I'm going to use one of the insiders from the kit, and I chose one of the sentiments, and to cut this out, I am going to use a hexagon stacklet. I thought this sugar cube cardstock was a bit too bright for the background, so to make it look a little more rustic to go with the color palette, I brought in my brown blending brush and toffee ink pad. And then using circular motion starting from the outside going in, I recolored this cardstock. I made sure to get a nice base layer of the toffee, and then I went in just around the edges to darken those up a little bit. Off camera, I prepared a top fold toffee card base, and I'm going to start assembling by adding my chevron piece flat down in the center of the card front. This leaves a nice toffee border all the way around. Then for the sentiment, I added some foam tape to the back, and once I pull that release paper, I'm going to add it toward the top center of my card front. To finish the card off, I decided to bring in some gold matte enamel dots, and I added some of those to the card front, tucking some in behind the hexagon. My second card is also a toffee card base. This time I have it folded along the longer edge. I placed the chevron piece, just like with the first one, flat down on the front of the card, and then for added dimension on this card, I added foam sticky strips to the back of that mulled wine frame. I peel back just little bits of each side of the release paper, and that way it gives me a little bit more time and room to adjust when I go to place it on my card front. Once it is in place, I press it down firmly, and then I peel off the rest of that release paper. For the sentiment on the second card, I'm going to be using the Thinking of You stamp from the On Occasion set. This will be stamped in sour gummy onto a scrap of toffee cardstock. Because I want to make sure the sour gummy is nice and bold against the toffee background, I did ink it up and stamp it twice. Then I took it off camera to die cut it out with a coordinating die, and I also added some foam sticky strips to the back of this. Once I pulled the release paper on the sentiment, I placed it in the lower right hand corner of the card, having some of the sentiment overlap that frame. Then to finish it off, I brought back in those same gold matte enamel dots and added a few to the front. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video. If you enjoyed the process, a thumbs up is appreciated. And if you're not already a subscriber, we do hope you'll click on the button below so you're the first to know about our latest videos. To find out more about the products I used today, you can check out the links in the description box below or visit the Tailored Expressions online store at tailoredexpressions.com.